Hello everyone, this is Daniel aka Bbeltdan and welcome back to part 2 of how to make a latex mask. In the first part we got this life cast of my son using some plaster bandages that we got at a arts and crafts stores, and we actually used plaster repairs that you can get at any hardware store to actually pour into that cast to get this finished life cast here. So now we're going to continue on with the mask making build using some clay to go ahead and sculpt over this to get the mask that we were wanting, to get all the details that we're wanting down, and then we're going to use that to make a negative mold that will pour the liquid latex in to slush around to start building up the layers of our mask. So let's go ahead and get right to it.
So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to need a few items. Of course, we're going to need the bust that we made in the first episode, but also we're going to need some clay. You could use any kind of clay, but I'm going to try some air dry clay for this particular project. But to sculpt it, we're going to need some sculpting tools. I have here some cheap ones that I found at a hobby store. But since we're also using air dry clay, we need to try to keep it moist, so we're going to use some water in a spritz bottle. Also, the water will help smooth it out.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sculpt of my son's head and I'm going to go around and give it a nice thin, well, decent sized layer all around of clay. And normally, like you see I did with this guy right here, I would use this plasticine type clay. However, though, for this I'm going to go ahead and try using this air dry clay here.
Now the reason about why I'm using air dry clay is because it actually sculpts very easily and very well, and plus it's also very easy to smooth out. So just hit it with a little bit of water and y'all can smooth it out and get some pretty good details. Now the downside with this clay is that it dries out real quick, as we'll see a little bit later in the episode. But what I'm doing right here, as I mentioned, is I'm laying out a good thin layer across the whole thing, and I'm kind of working from a skeleton. I'm starting around the eyes, around the cheekbones and stuff, and I'm spraying a little bit of water on it to try to help get that clay to stick a little bit better onto the cast. But so as you can see here, here's that skeleton that I was talking about, just to kind of get it to where the clay is going to stay on. And from there I am going through and making sure that I am marking where I'm keeping the mouth and the eyes and everything. And here we have it almost completed. I just start taking the clay, smooth it, smash it out, put it on. You know, you want to try to cover the whole thing, and you want to try to get the layer as even as possible. And here we have the whole thing covered except for the eyes, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay, so we got everything covered with a nice layer except for the eyes. The reason why I didn't do the eyes is because that's going to be open anyways. There's not going to be a whole lot of details there that needs to be sculpted. Maybe a few, but they're going to be cut out anyway, so I didn't see any reason to put the clay there. So the next step before I start really trying to work on the character that this mask is supposed to be, I'm actually going to try to, smooth this whole thing out so I got a nice, good, clean, even canvas for me to start working on. So let me go ahead and do that. And how I'm going to do that is just spritz it with water and use my fingers and maybe some other little tools. I'm actually going to try to experiment with a couple of things to see where we get the best effects, but I want this to be all completely smooth first. And plus, by doing this, it will ensure that none of this clay is drying out right now. So let's go ahead and get to that.
Okay, the clay moves very well once it's wet, so that's the main advantage of this. And I do know that there's other kind of clays out there which I would like to try, and I'll probably try on my next mask, which would be WED clay, which is WD stands for Walt Disney clay. It is air dry, it is water based, but the thing is that it takes a long time for it to dry out. I think it has like some glycerin or something inside it. But once I get that all smoothed out and everything, now as you see here, I'm working on the details. I'm taking pieces of the clay, I'm rolling up into balls, and I'm applying it on. And I do have off to the side some reference materials of the character that I am trying to make here. not going to tell you who it is, see if y'all can figure it out. But it's not an exact copy of the reference, but the reference is just there for me for kind of inspiration. It's also, I'm not going to say it's my take of it, but this particular character, his look has changed so many times, so you can kind of say maybe this is just my interpretation of one of the changes that the character may have gone through, but it's based off of one particular movie. And this was a movie that actually my son picked. He said that he liked the way this particular character looked in this particular movie. Let's see if y'all can figure it out. I'm just going in here trying to smooth out using all these sculpting tools to my advantage to try to get all the little details in. This character, as you can see, has highlighted areas around his eyes. His cheekbones is very prominent, but there's a lot of scars. There's a hint for use, a lot of scars around all over, so I'm trying to get some of that scar look and open sores and muscles that you can see through. And I'm just continuing on with it, just hitting it with some water. As I put on more clay, it helps the clay stick onto itself a lot easier, and it helps it blend in and smooth in. I use my fingers, I use the sculpting tools, and if you don't have the sculpting tools or you don't have those available, but you can fabricate your own just using some popsicle sticks. That's actually what I started off with first before I found these, and these were like about, I think, $5 at a hobby store, so it's really not that expensive to do. So just kind of going through, taking my time, trying to get the details in as much as possible. And when you're making these details, you want to try to make them very, very prominent, very sharp, because we're going to be going through a little bit later, as you'll see, to try to smooth it out. And when you're smoothing it out, it actually softens up a lot of those details. So when you're first sculpting, you want to make those details really kind of pop and make them really very prominent. So therefore, once again, when you smooth them out, they soften up, but they're still there. Exaggerations now will lead to just the look that you're wanting for and a little bit later. So just still adding on some more clay, and I'll add some on, and then I take some away to try to get the look. And for the looks here, it's a lot of scarring that this particular character has. It's a lot of missing flesh and stuff. So I add the flesh in, and then I take it away, and I try to do what I can to sculpt as much of the little details as possible. And with the clay, if you don't like what you're doing, or you don't like the way it's looking, you just simply just rip off what you don't like and just start over, or add on some more clay and take it away again to start over. You can just start over. Don't be afraid to mess up, because as long as this clay is somewhat malleable, and with air dry, if you just sprayed it with some water, it can become malleable again. You don't have to settle for anything. You can always go back and do some more cleaning. Now here what I'm doing is I'm actually softening it up. I have some paper towels that I have wetted, and I'm going through, and now I'm just smoothing out everything. And I probably should have got a little bit closer up here, but all those little details that were very prominent, that were very sharp, are now being softened up using this paper towel, and it's smoothing out the rest of it. You could use a little bit of a soft rag, you can use a sponge, anything that is kind of wet to try to help finalize your look. So I'm actually getting closer to actually being finished with the character at this point in time. Hopefully, can y'all guess, have any idea who it is? Maybe? Or y'all having a big, is it kind of a nightmare for y'all to try to figure this out? Now from here, I'm going to add in some little extra details to try to simulate the pores in the skin. So I have a little Scotch-Brite here, and I'm going through and I'm hitting it. Now the Scotch-Brite is damp, but it is not terribly wet, and so is the clay. And there you have is the finished character.
Now we have the finished sculpt of the mask that my son is wanting, and it's not absolutely perfect. I think if I could spend just a little bit more time on it, it would definitely be a lot better. But we're running a little bit close to Halloween. That's when he wants this finished, and he's happy with the way it is. So now we're ready to move on to the next part, where we're going to go ahead and make the negative mold of this particular type of casting. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take some clay. I'm going to use some different type of clay here. I'm going to use this type of cheap little modeling clay that you can find, that I found at the store, and I'm going to create a bridge all around this, basically to act as a separation line on it. And then we're going to start applying mix up the plaster, start applying that on, and start working on that negative mold. So let's go ahead and get started.
Now the purpose of this is just to kind of form a bit of a dam as I go ahead, because this is going to be a two-part mold. You can make as many parts as you want. I would not recommend doing a one-part mold on something like this, because then you wouldn't be able to get out your piece. Two-part mold is by bare minimum what you would need for something like this. So I've seen people that have split these things up into several different parts, up to 12 I believe. But see, I have the dam here. Now I'm going through and I've mixed up some plaster of Paris. See my previous episode to see exactly how I mix that up, and I'm putting it on. This is a very thin coat while the plaster of Paris is running, and I'm brushing it on because I want to try to get as much of the detail as possible and make sure that there's no air bubbles, and I'm going back and forth, top to bottom, side to side. I'm brushing it in every which way as much as possible. And I did put on something that I used for a kind of a mold release on it before I started doing this, and I would recommend probably doing that, but I don't think it's really necessary at this point. Now as time goes on, it starts to get just a little bit thicker, the plaster of Paris, so you just keep adding on layer after layer after layer as it gets thicker to try to build up as much thickness as you can, all around your first part of your mold. Now from here, to add a little bit of strength, I have some burlap here that I've dipping in, and at this point in time, the plaster of Paris, it's almost kind of like a melted marshmallow to a certain degree. So that's the closest I think I can come up with. So I just dip it in the burlap that I cut into strips, and I'm laying it across, and said this is to help give this strength, so it won't. So it's least likely to break. It's not a guarantee that it's not going to break. That guarantee comes from, the proper formula, the mix of the plaster. But as you can see here, it's because it's getting a lot thicker. The plaster is thickening up. I'm getting definitely a much thicker mold that I'm wanting here. And I'm starting to think about how I want to probably try to shape it, get the base down as much as possible. And I know that I'm going to have to flip this thing and put it upside down to be able to pour the latex inside it. So I'm also thinking at the top about trying to come up with a base on the top of the head and flatten that out a bit. So from here you can kind of do a little bit more sculpting. There's that flat part that I was saying, and so I dip my hand in the water and I'm just using it just to smooth it out. This part isn't really necessary. It just makes the mold just look a little bit cleaner and a little bit nicer and less lumpy. So just adding some more back onto the top. So I try to get that flat top as much as I can. And now that we are done with the front portion, now it's time for us to go ahead and look to the back. I put some clay around the edges just to prevent the next set of the mold from kind of caving over and encompassing the front portion of the mold. But all you do from this point is just pretty much just rinse and repeat. However though, because the way that this is designed, I can go ahead and flip it on its front, so to say, and actually pour it straight from a different orientation to try to help get a better mold. Now I have the two-part mold right here. It's all dry. I think I waited about 1 hour to let it dry, and I'm ready to go ahead and take it outside to go ahead and start trying to remove it. So I just hit it with a little bit of a hammer, soft hammer right there, just to kind of help shake it loose. And I see that there's a little crack forming that I can go ahead and get a screwdriver in and just work it little by little around until it actually starts to come apart. The front portion surprisingly came off first. The back, for some reason, took a little bit of extra work, but I was able to get it out. And the bust that we did in the first episode is, for the most part, pretty well intact. So I just now remove all of the clay, which it came out very easily. Had very little of it that actually wanted to stay inside the mold. And there you go. We now have the negative cast of our mask that we are going to make for our two-part mold.
And everyone, after all that, we now have our two-part mold that we are going to be using to pour the liquid latex in to get the mask that we are needing. As you can see here, we have a bit of a gap between his head cast and the negative cast of the mask that we're making, and we're wanting that to allow the thickness of the mask that we're trying to make. But the latex is going to shrink just a little bit, so hopefully we're still on track of having a nice form-fitting mask for him. And let me know what y'all probably think about the mask that I did, the sculpt that I did. Did y'all figure out who it was? If y'all didn't, well, I'm not going to tell you. You need to go find that out for yourself. But if you do know who it is, let me know what y'all think about how I did on the sculpt. I mean, I could have done a lot better if I had a little bit more time, but time is running out. We're getting closer to Halloween. And once again, as I said earlier, my son was happy with the mask as is, so I decided to go ahead and continue moving forward. With that all being said, that concludes episode 2 of how to make a latex mask. Hope you enjoyed it, but be ready for part 3 that will be coming out hopefully within a few days before Halloween. But until then, I just want to say this is Bbeltdan, aka Daniel, or Daniel, aka Bbeltdan. This is part 2 of a latex making a latex mask. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay.